Hi everyone, this is Shauna Charosa, RAYAC's Executive Officer, and this is my desk. In this monthly video cast, we go over questions that are coming across my desk every single day so we can have much smoother real estate transactions here in York and Adams counties. If you are fans of this video cast, you'll probably have heard me say on more than one occasion, I'm not an attorney and I do not play one on TV. But I'm very excited because we have back as our guest again a real-life attorney, RAYAC solicitor, Peter Ruth, who is an attorney with Stock and Leader in downtown York. So Peter, welcome to my desk.
Yes, thank you for having me back. I feel honored and privileged. So.
Awesome. Always happy to have you here. So the question we have today, we continue to be in a market where there are multiple offers out there.
Yes.
And one of the questions that is coming across our desk is, how do I use the Price Escalation Addendum?
Yes.
So probably, I would say from what I hear is that this is one of the most confusing addendums out there, and agents have a lot of questions about it. So can you please just give us a brief explanation about what it is? What is
Sure.
the PEA?
Yes, so I would second, I will say it's not necessarily the most confusing, but I think it is the most least understood of all the forms, at least in terms of the hotline calls that I get. So price escalation addendum, as you kind of hit on the head, unless you're in a multiple offer situation, you're ordinarily not going to see this. But what this form allows a buyer to do is to basically say, although you've listed the property, let's say for $200,000, I'm willing to escalate above my offer of $200,000 in the event the seller gets another bona fide offer that is higher, that has a net purchase price, and that's the key thing, a net purchase price higher than the offer that that first buyer is going to make. So if you think about it from the buyer's perspective, what they're hoping is that they're going to beat out any offer that might be a little bit better than theirs, as long as that first buyer making the offer is willing to go above their initial offer. To put yourself in the shoes of the seller, though, really, it's like you're playing poker, but the buyer is showing you their hand before you've even started the game, and they're saying, hey, I know I'm offering you this, but I'm actually willing to pay much more than that offer, as long as you're willing to accept it and as long as certain terms apply. So that's what the form is intended to do, but as you kind of said, there are some pitfalls, there's some misunderstandings. There's also some things I think in the form that could be defined a little bit better or more clearly, potentially to include certain items, but we can get into that. So.
Okay. So what's your best advice on how to use the form?
The first thing I will say for all of you listing agents out there getting these documents and getting an offer that has a price escalation addendum, it is not required to use that form, right? So that is a part, that's an addendum to the agreement, that's an offer. Remember, your seller has not signed that price escalation addendum. So as I said before, in the seller's shoes, if you have an offer at 200 and they're willing to escalate up to 210, what the seller could do is simply counter back to that seller and say, if you'll accept 210, I'll take your offer. Now again, the only time that this comes into play is if the seller signs off on this form. So that is the one thing I would consider. This only comes about if there's a multiple offer situation. So the way that it should play out is you have an offer, and that offer contains the price escalation addendum. And prior to signing that offer, you get another offer in, and that offer is better. Okay, so at that point you'd sign off on everything, and that's really when the form comes into play. So I think there's some confusion in terms of the timing and the mechanism, but really that's the way you do it with your multiple offers. You'll sit down, you get out to your net purchase price, and we'll talk about how that's defined here in a second under the confusing parts. Get to that net purchase price, and then you find out who essentially has the best offer. And then if the lower offer has a price escalation addendum attached to it, that's when that price escalation will kick in. So that's the general process, but I think if we use some examples, it might be a little clearer. So.
Okay. So I guess, when would the seller sign it? Let's say I have two offers on the table. The one has a PEA and the other one does not. what terms need to exist for the offer that doesn't have the PEA in order for my seller to sign the PEA?
That's a good question. So let's say you have an offer that is $200,000 and does not request any seller assist or seller concessions. That does not have a price escalation addendum attached to it. You then get an offer for $200,000 before you've signed the first offer that says that you have, I want $200,000 as the purchase price, but they're asking for for $5,000 of concession. Mm-hmm. So two offers, both at $200,000, but the second offer has that $5,000 concession. So if that second offer does have a price escalation addendum, whether or not the first offer does, the second one that in effect has a lower net purchase price has that, that's when that seller could sign that form and have that kick in. And let's assume the price escalation addendum is willing to increase your offer up to $210,000, okay, in $1,000 increments. Mm-hmm. So you're at $200,000, but the net purchase on that second is actually at $195,000. So the way you actually get there, and this could be some of the confusion, is you're actually going to add $6,000 onto that second offer. So their offer is going to be $206,000 because you're still going to honor the $5,000 of seller assist, which will then net your seller $201,000, which is $1,000 more than that first offer. So if those numbers made sense, again, you had that essentially a higher offer when you look at it at first glance, but once you do the math to find out, because you signed off on that price escalation addendum, that's when that kicks in, and that's where you increase your purchase price to $206,000, $201,000 becoming that new purchase price for you. So,
all right. So if I'm hearing you, that a couple of terms that need to be in place is that the seller it still has to be a viable offer.
That's correct.
So that offer cannot be signed or have expired.
Correct.
At this point, so it needs to be a viable offer. It's a better offer than the contract with the PEA.
Yes.
And you get to the PEA to the point where the net sales price is better than the terms of the second offer.
That's correct. Now that, and again, not to add any confusion, but when we say a better offer, we have to be a little bit careful there. Sure. Because that's the one confusing part. When you look at the definition of net purchase price, it is purchase price as identified in paragraph 2 of your agreement, less seller concessions or seller assist. Mm-hmm. What about the crazy situation we were in when buyers were offering buyer assist to sellers, or a buyer is offering to pay both sides of the transfer tax? Now, I think to anybody who knows anything about gross or net and what we're looking at there, and take taxes, for example, you're not just looking at income from W-2 only, you would look at all of your income from anywhere received. And if that buyer is offering concessions, in my opinion, now outside of the form, my legal opinion is those should be factored in to that net purchase price, right? The way the form reads, though, it doesn't mention anything about buyer concessions or buyer assist or anything like that. So that's where it can get a little confusing, where you might have a buyer offering $5,000. If your seller has signed this form, you can't factor that in determining those net purchase price versus the other one. Mm-hmm. So I think that is one avenue that people can kind of run into that. And again, the underlying theme here, even in that first situation where you had the $200,000 offer and then the $200,000 plus the seller assist, there's nothing wrong with just simply countering back, aside from that, before you signed an offer, to that second buyer saying, hey, are you willing to just pay $206,000 or $201,000 or whatever the price is that will get you to that point? So again, I think massaging those a little bit and figuring those out, that is one of the imperative parts for the agent to do for them. But that is again, it comes down to factoring in what actually goes into that purchase price and how you determine what that net is.
Okay. So I know this situation happens.
Yeah.
What about when we get offers and they both have PEAs to them?
Yes.
How in the world do you determine which is the better offer when there's two PEAs attached?
Right. So again, it's all sitting down and using the form. So let's assume same offer, $200,000, but I'm going to go up to $210,000 in $1,000 increments if I have a better offer. You then get an offer for $200,000, right? But that has a $5,000 seller assist, okay? But they're going to also escalate up to, let's say, $205,000, all right, in the $1,000 increments. Right off the bat, regardless of everything else, you're going to go to that purchase price of that escalated, the highest escalated purchase price of that other offer, the $205,000, and then essentially add $1,000 to that and the first offer is then going to be at 206. Okay, so that is the real way to do that. Now, again, you can get down into the nitty gritty even if you want. Another way to factor that in, now you might get some pushback, I think, from the first buyer if you do this, is you could take the 195, right, and then escalate that. So you go up to essentially your, the 205, but then you have to also then factor that in that you're getting a $5,000 seller assist. So really, should that purchase price be more than that to get you to factor that in? So that's where, again, the confusion lies in the form. My opinion is if they have an escalation with any seller assist, just take their escalated purchase price, whatever the highest amount is, and then as long as that first offer has escalation above that, it's whatever that increment is above the highest escalation that's there. So again, it's a little confusing without the numbers, but just remember, escalate as much as you can on each of them, and then whichever, if the lower offer is there, you're $1,000 above that highest lower offer.
Good advice.
Clear as mud, right?
Yeah. And I think, for our viewers, one of the things that PAR does well is they develop guidelines over how to use these addendums. So read those. Make sure you're going through it and read them. And I think, Peter would agree with me. One of your first calls, if you're uncertain how to use these forms or find it to be a bit confusing, contact your broker.
Absolutely. Yep.
Make sure you're getting their input and guidance over how to use these forms correctly and how to advise your sellers over what to do.
Yeah.
So,
and just remember, the examples we use today have 2 competing offers. Okay. And we were just talking about having 35, 40 showings on a property and how many offers are you going to get? How many of those? That is really where this form gets to be very, very confusing. So at the end of the day, just remember, a little bit discouraging for buyers, but there's nothing you can do to obligate the seller to comply with your request for the price escalation. They can simply just say, you're willing to pay this at the highest escalation, that's what we would like. That's a negotiating tactic. So again, if the confusion starts to set in, you feel like you're spending more time at that, that's a broker conversation. Look at the forms that PAR has. That's a great point. I think they're very articulate. But even those examples only go into a 2-offer scenario. So I think it's once that starts to compound, that's where more confusion can apply. But call your broker, call PAR, call the hotline, and we'll hopefully walk you through that process.
All right, so I have one final question for you.
Yes.
So I've seen in MLS remarks where it says, we are not going to accept offers subject to a PEA. Is that good advice? What would you say to agents who are trying to do that practice?
I personally think that is not great advice. I think it's very poor advice. There are a whole bunch of potential licensing regulations, real estate commission regulations that you could be running up against. Remember, this is different from saying no love letters, like a lot of agents were putting that into their broker remarks. That gets into some fair housing issues and how you dance around that. You don't have that justification when PAR has put forth a form that is acceptable for use. So that's where you kind of have to, you're more or less explaining to your client, I don't know how to use this form, so please don't do that. So I think it's not best business practice first and foremost. Plus, once you factor in the ethical and the legal ramifications, it's not something you should be discouraging. But to that point, I think you're easy out, and not to kind of beat this too much, but if you're uncomfortable with the form, sit down with your broker. And at the end of the day, just remember, this is a buyer showing you what their maximum purchase price will be. You can use that as a negotiating tactic and simply getting back to the buyer and saying, will you pay this? And if yes, we'll move forward. So.
Wonderful. Well, I think that was really great advice. I'm sure it's clear as mud to everybody out there. But final thoughts, read those guidelines, read the forms. When in doubt, make sure you're contacting the broker. Peter's always available to you through the free RAYAC legal hotline as well. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me again.
All right. I hope that information was helpful to you. If there's ever any other topics you would like me to address, please feel free to contact me because my doors and ears are always open to you. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day.